It was just another Tuesday in downtown Chicago. The kind of day where nothing special happens and you go to bed thinking about what you need to do tomorrow. Jake had been living in the same apartment building for almost 9 months now, and he could pretty much predict how each day would go. Wake up at 7:30, coffee first, always coffee first, check emails while the city wakes up outside his window, then straight to work at his computer, designing logos and websites for small businesses around the city. Being a freelance graphic designer meant he rarely left his apartment during work hours. His office was his bedroom, his kitchen was his break room, and his living room was where he tried to pretend he had a social life. The building he lived in was one of those old brick places with thin walls and creaky floors. You could hear everything your neighbors were doing, whether you wanted to or not. The lady upstairs walked around in heels at all hours. The guy downstairs played his TV too loud. And across the hall lived someone he only knew as the quiet girl, who always seemed to be in a hurry. He had seen her maybe 30 times in 9 months. Quick glimpses in the hallway when they were both checking mail or heading out. She was probably in her mid-20s, always dressed nicely, always looking like she was running late for something important. They had done that awkward neighbor thing a few times. You know, the polite nod, the small smile, the, "Hey, how's it?" going that nobody really expects an answer to. But lately, something seemed different about her. Over the past few weeks, Jake had noticed she looked stressed. Really stressed. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Dark circles under her eyes, hair that looked like she had been running her hands through it all day. And a few times he had seen her wiping tears from her face as she fumbled with her keys. Jake wasn't the type to get involved in other people's business. He had learned that lesson the hard way in his last apartment complex. But something about seeing someone struggle right across the hall from you makes it hard to ignore. He had thought about knocking on her door, maybe asking if she was okay. But what do you say to someone you barely know? "Hey, I noticed you seem upset." Sounds creepy no matter how you say it. This particular Tuesday started exactly like all the others. His alarm went off. He hit snooze twice, then dragged himself to the kitchen. The coffee maker was already set, up from the night before because past Jake was always looking out for morning Jake. While the coffee brewed, he opened his laptop and saw 3 new project requests in his inbox. Good news for his bank account, bad news for his free time. The first project was a logo for a pet grooming business. The second was a website redesign for a local restaurant. The third was some marketing materials for a real estate agent. All pretty standard stuff, but it would keep him busy for the next week or two. Around noon, he took a break to make a sandwich. That's when he heard the first signs that something was wrong across the hall. Voices. 2 people talking, but not in a normal conversation way. One voice was getting louder and more aggressive. The other voice sounded upset, maybe crying. Jake tried to mind his own business and focus on his work. He put on his headphones and turned up his music. But the voices kept getting louder. Even with the music, he could hear bits and pieces. The man's voice was angry, demanding. The woman's voice sounded scared and defensive. It made his stomach turn. This went on for about an hour. Jake found himself getting more and more distracted from his work. He kept looking toward his front door, wondering if he should do something. Call building management maybe, or the police. But what would he say? That his neighbors were having an argument? That probably happened in every building in the city every single day. Then, around 2 in the afternoon, everything went quiet. Not normal quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels heavy and wrong. Like when you're watching a movie and the music stops right before something bad happens. Jake tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. He found himself checking the time every few minutes and listening for any sounds from across the hall. Nothing. It stayed quiet for the rest of the afternoon. By evening, he had managed to finish the pet grooming logo and start on the restaurant website. It felt good to get lost in the work, to focus on colors and fonts instead of whatever drama was happening 20 feet away from his front door. Around 7 o'clock, he decided to order some dinner, Chinese food from the place down the street that knew him by name because he ordered from there way too often. While he was waiting for the delivery, he heard a door slam in the hallway. Heavy footsteps going toward the elevator. A man's voice muttering something he couldn't quite make. Then silence again. Jake went back to his computer, but he kept finding himself looking toward his front door. Something felt different about the building, like the air itself had changed. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been going on across the hall was far from over. He had no idea that in less than an hour, his quiet, predictable life was about to change in a way he never could have imagined. Jake was deep into designing the restaurant website when he heard his apartment door open. The sound was so normal, so ordinary, that his brain didn't even register it as strange at first. He just assumed he had forgotten to lock the door again. It wouldn't be the first time. Living alone sometimes made you careless about these things. The building maintenance crew sometimes came by in the evenings to check smoke detectors or fix small problems. Jake had given the building manager permission to enter for repairs, so he figured that's what this was. Without even looking away from his computer screen, he called out toward the living room. "Hey, just give me a minute to finish this up. Almost done here." But nobody answered back. No footsteps. No sound of tools or work being done. Just silence. That's when Jake's brain finally caught up with what was happening. Someone was in his apartment and they weren't saying anything. A chill ran down his spine. He slowly turned around in his desk chair, expecting to see a maintenance worker or maybe building security. Instead, he saw her. The girl from across the hall was standing in his living room doorway, and she looked like she had been through a war. Her hair was a mess, like she had been pulling at it or running her hands through it for hours. Her makeup was smeared around her eyes, creating dark streaks down her cheeks. She was breathing hard, like she had been running or crying, or maybe both. Her clothes were wrinkled and her hands were shaking. Jake's first thought was that someone had hurt her. His second thought was wondering how she had gotten into his apartment. But before he could ask either question, she started walking toward his bedroom. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but with purpose. Like she had a plan and nothing was going to stop her from following through with it. "Wait, hold on," Jake said, standing up from his chair. "Are you okay? What's happening?" But she didn't answer. She didn't even look back at him. She just kept walking toward his bedroom like she belonged there, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Jake followed her, his mind racing with questions and confusion. By the time he reached his bedroom doorway, she was already inside, standing near his bed. She turned around to face him, and for the first time since she had entered his apartment, she looked directly into his eyes. What he saw there wasn't what he expected. He had expected to see fear, or confusion, or maybe anger. Instead, he saw determination mixed with something that looked like desperation, like someone who had been backed into a corner and had finally decided to fight back. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a strength in them that hadn't been there during their brief hallway encounters. Without saying a word, she reached for the bottom of her shirt and pulled it over her head. Jake's eyes went wide, and he immediately looked away, his face turning red. "Whoa, hey, what are you doing?" he said, looking at the ceiling, the walls, anywhere but at her. "You don't need to do this. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out, another way." But she kept going. He could hear the sound of fabric hitting the floor, his jeans, her shoes, each piece of clothing landing with a soft thud on his bedroom carpet. Jake kept his eyes focused on a spot on the wall above her head, his heart beating so fast he thought it might jump out of his chest. "Please," he said, his voice shaky. "You don't have to do this, just tell me what's wrong. We can talk about whatever happened." When the sound stopped, Jake risked a quick glance and immediately looked away again. She was standing there completely vulnerable, but something about the way she was holding herself told him this wasn't about what he thought it was about. This wasn't about attraction or desire. This was about something much deeper and more complicated. Then she smiled. Not the kind of smile you see in movies or on TV. Not seductive or mysterious. It was the kind of smile that breaks your heart because you can see all the pain behind it. It was the smile of someone who had just done the scariest thing they could imagine, and was proud of themselves for having the courage to do it. It was the smile of someone who had been told for so long that they weren't allowed to make their own choices, that making any choice, even a scary one, felt like freedom. It was defiant and sad and hopeful all at the same time. Jake grabbed the blanket from his bed and held it out to her, still not really looking directly at her. "Here," he said softly. "You're shaking. Let me help you." She took the blanket and wrapped it around herself, and only then did Jake feel comfortable making eye contact again. When he did, he saw that she was crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears from earlier, but quiet tears that seemed to come from a place of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first thing she had said since entering his apartment, and her voice was barely audible. Jake grabbed his desk chair and rolled it over to face the bed, making sure to keep a comfortable distance between them. He wanted her to feel safe, not trapped or pressured. She had wrapped the blanket around herself like armor, pulling it tight, under her chin. Her breathing was starting to slow down, but she was still shaking. "I'm going to make some tea," Jake said gently. "Do you want some? It might help with the shaking." She nodded without looking up at him. Jake went to his small kitchen and put the kettle on. While he waited for the water to boil, he tried to process what had just happened. His neighbor, someone he barely knew, had just walked into his apartment and done something that seemed completely out of character for the quiet, reserved person he had seen in the hallway. When he came back with 2 mugs of chamomile tea, she was sitting on the edge of his bed, still wrapped in the blanket. She had stopped crying, but her eyes were still red and puffy. Jake handed her the mug and sat back down in his chair. "I don't even know your name," he said, after a few minutes of silence. "Riley," she said quietly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I'm Riley." "I'm Jake. I guess we're finally properly meeting." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "Yeah, not exactly how I imagined it would happen." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their tea. Jake didn't want to push her to talk before she was ready, but he also needed to understand what was happening, why she had come to his apartment, why she had done what she did, whether she was safe. "The guy who was in your apartment earlier," Jake said carefully. "Is he gone?" Riley's hands tightened around her mug. "Yeah, he's gone. Finally." Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "Not physically. But there are other ways to hurt. Someone, you know?" Jake nodded. He knew. His own past had taught him that bruises heal, but some other kinds of damage take much longer to fix. "How long were you two together?" Jake asked. 3 years, Riley said, staring down at her tea. 3 years of being told I was stupid. 3 years of being told I couldn't do anything right. 3 years of having every decision questioned, every friend criticized, every thought dismissed." She took a shaky breath and continued. "He never hit me, so I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad. People have it worse, right? At least he wasn't violent. But tonight he said something that made me realize I had completely lost myself." Jake waited for her to continue, not wanting to interrupt. "He told me I wasn't allowed to take that art class I had signed up for, said it was a waste of money and that I wasn't talented enough anyway. And for a second, just for a second, I believed him. I actually considered canceling the class because he said I wasn't good enough." Riley's voice was getting stronger now, less shaky. "That's when I knew I had to end it, when I realized I had stopped trusting my own judgment about everything, even about myself." "So you broke up with him tonight?" "I told him to leave. He didn't want to go. He kept saying I was being dramatic, that I'd change my mind by tomorrow. He said I needed him, that I couldn't handle life on my own." She looked up at Jake for the first time since she had started talking. "Do you know what that feels like? To have someone you trusted tell you that you're not capable of existing without them?" Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew exactly what that felt like. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do know what that feels like." Riley studied his face. "You've been there too?" "Different situation, but yeah. Someone who made me feel like I was lucky they put up with me. Someone who convinced me that nobody else would ever want to be with me." Jake set down his mug and leaned forward slightly. "It took me 2 years after that relationship ended to feel like myself again." 2 years? Riley's voice was small. "Everyone's different, but yeah, it took me a long time to trust my own thoughts again, to believe that my opinions mattered, to stop second-guessing every decision I made." They sat in comfortable silence. For a moment, both lost in their own memories. Can I ask you something? Riley said. Sure. Why didn't you, when I came in here and did what I did, why didn't you take advantage of that? Jake looked at her carefully before answering. Because that's not who I am. And more importantly, I could see that you were hurting. Someone who's hurting doesn't need someone to take advantage of them. They need someone to help them feel safe. Riley's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked like tears of relief rather than sadness. He always made me feel like men only wanted one thing from women, like that's all I was good for, like that's all any woman was good for. She wiped her eyes with the corner of the blanket. I guess I wanted to see if that was true. If I walked into a man's room and offered myself, would he just take what he wanted, or would he see that I was a person who needed help? Jake felt his heart break a little bit for this woman he barely knew. You're worth so much more than that, he said. You're worth having someone listen to you. You're worth having your thoughts and feelings respected. You're worth being treated like the complex, interesting person you are, not just like an object. Riley smiled then. A real smile this time, not the heartbreaking one from earlier. Thank you, she said, for seeing me as a person, for not taking advantage, for making me tea and listening to me ramble about my problems. You're not rambling, Jake said, and you're not a problem. You're someone who just escaped from a bad situation, and that takes incredible courage. The conversation continued deep into the night. Riley had moved from the bed to Jake's comfortable reading chair by the window, still wrapped in the blanket like it was her shield against the world. Jake had made more tea, ordered some food from the Chinese place downstairs, and settled into listening mode. It felt natural, like they had been friends for years instead of strangers who had just properly met a few hours ago. I used to paint, Riley said around midnight, staring out the window at the city lights. I was actually pretty good at it too. I had this little easel set up in the corner of my bedroom, and I would spend hours working on these landscapes and portraits, nothing fancy, just things that made me happy. What happened to your painting? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. He said it was a waste of space, said the smell of paint gave him headaches, said I was spending too much money on supplies for a hobby that wasn't going anywhere. Riley's voice got quieter. So I packed it all up and put it in storage, told myself I'd get back to it someday when we had a bigger place. Jake shook his head. That's terrible. Art isn't supposed to be practical. It's supposed to make you feel alive. You think so? I know so. I'm a designer, remember? I spend my days creating things that make people happy or help them communicate something important. There's nothing more valuable than that. Riley smiled and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I miss it. The painting, I mean. I miss the way it felt to create something from nothing, to take a blank canvas and turn it into something beautiful. So why don't you start again? I don't know. I guess I'm scared I've lost the ability. It's been over a year since I touched a paintbrush. What if I'm not good anymore? What if he was right about me not being talented? Jake leaned forward in his chair. Riley, let me ask you something. When you were painting, how did it make you feel? Happy, peaceful, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then it doesn't matter if you're good at it or not. If it makes you feel that way, then it's worth doing. Period. They talked about art for a while, about the difference between creating for others and creating for yourself. Jake showed her some of his design work on his laptop, and Riley's eyes lit up when she saw his use of color and composition. She had opinions about his work, good insights about what worked and what didn't. It was clear she had an artistic eye. You know what's funny? Riley said as the clock moved past 1 a.m. This is the longest conversation I've had in months where someone actually listened to what I was saying. Really listened, not just waited for their turn to talk. What do you mean? With him, every conversation eventually became about him. I could start talking about my day at work, and somehow within 5 minutes we'd be discussing his problems, his frustrations, his needs. I stopped sharing things that mattered to me because I knew he'd either dismiss them or turn them around. To be about him. Jake felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, not anger at Riley, but anger at the situation. Anger at people who took advantage of others' kindness and trust. That's not how relationships are supposed to work, he said. I know that now. But when you're in the middle of it, it happens so gradually that you don't notice. One day you're sharing everything, and then suddenly you realize you haven't talked about your own dreams and goals in months. Riley stood up from the chair and walked over to Jake's bookshelf, still wrapped in the blanket. She ran her finger along the spines of his books. You read a lot, she observed. Yeah, it helps me relax after staring at a computer screen all day. Do you like to read? I used to. I had this whole list of books I wanted to read. Classic novels, poetry, biographies of artists I admired. But he said reading was antisocial, said I was using books to avoid spending time with him. So you stopped. Reading too? Riley nodded. I stopped doing a lot of things. I didn't realize how much I had given up until tonight when I was packing some of my stuff. I found this notebook where I used to write down book recommendations and quotes I liked. The last entry was from over 2 years ago. Jake watched her face as she spoke. He could see the sadness there, but also something else. Something that looked like determination. I want my life back, she said suddenly, turning to face him. I want to paint again, I want to read books, I want to take that art class, I want to have conversations where my opinions matter. Then do it, Jake said simply. It's scary though. What if I can't remember how to be myself? What if I've lost that person somewhere along the way? Jake stood up and walked over to where she was standing by the bookshelf. Riley, can I tell you something? In the few hours I've known you tonight, I've seen more of your real personality than I ever saw in those brief hallway encounters. You're funny, you're insightful, you have strong opinions about art and life. That person you're worried about losing, she's still here. She's been here all along, just waiting for someone to give her permission to come out again. Riley's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears this time. You really think so? I know so. The fact that you had the courage to leave that relationship tonight proves that the real you is still in there fighting. As the clock approached 2 a.m, Riley finally started to look tired. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going was starting to wear off, and Jake could see the exhaustion setting in. You should try to get some sleep, he said gently. I should probably go back to my apartment. You don't have to. I meant what I said earlier. You can stay here as long as you need to feel safe. I'll take the couch. Riley looked uncertain. I don't want to put you out. You're not putting me out. You're a person who needs help, and I have the ability to help you. It's really that simple. 6 months had passed since that night, and Jake's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. Riley had stayed on his couch for 3 days before finding the courage to go back to her apartment and face the aftermath of her breakup. But those 3 days had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected. It started with small things. Riley would knock on his door in the evenings, usually with coffee or takeout food, and they would sit and talk for hours. She told him about her job at the local library, how she helped people find books and organized community events. He told her about his design projects, the crazy clients who wanted their logos to be more purple but also more sophisticated. Within a week of their first real conversation, Riley had signed up for that art class she had mentioned. Not only did she sign up, but she bought a small easel and set it up in her apartment by the window where the light was best. The first painting she finished was of the view from Jake's bedroom window, the one she had looked out of during those long hours of conversation. I wanted to paint something that reminded me of feeling safe, she explained when she showed it to him. That window represents the night everything changed for me. Jake was amazed by the painting. Riley had captured not just the buildings and lights outside, but somehow the feeling of that night. The colors were warm and hopeful. Nothing like the dark, scared person who had walked into his apartment months earlier. As weeks turned into months, their friendship deepened. Jake found himself looking forward to Riley's visits more than anything else in his week. She would bring books to recommend, stories about interesting people she had met at the library, and always, new paintings to show him. You're getting really good at this, Jake said one evening as Riley propped up her latest work against his bookshelf. It was a portrait of an elderly man reading a newspaper, painted with such detail and emotion that Jake felt like he could hear the man's thoughts. You think so? I'm still learning so much. My teacher says I have natural talent, but I feel like I'm just now remembering how to see things clearly again. What do you mean? Riley sat down in what had become her usual spot, the reading chair by the window. For so long I saw everything through his opinions. If he said something was ugly, I believed it was ugly. If he said something was pointless, I stopped paying attention to it. Now I feel like I'm seeing the world with my own eyes for the first time in years. Jake understood exactly what she meant. After his own difficult relationship, he had gone through a similar process of relearning to trust his own judgment. It's like waking up from a bad dream, he said. Exactly. And the weird part is I'm not even angry anymore. I was for a while, but now I just feel grateful that I got out when I did. The turning point in their relationship came on a rainy Thursday evening in April. Riley had come over with Chinese food and a new book she wanted to lend Jake. They were sitting on his couch talking about the book when she suddenly went quiet. "Jake," she said, looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I think I'm falling in love with you." Jake's heart stopped for a moment. He had been feeling the same way for weeks, but hadn't known how to bring it up. Their friendship had become so precious to him that he was terrified of doing anything to mess it up. "Riley," he said carefully, "are you sure you're ready for that? It hasn't been that long since—" "I know," she interrupted. "And 6 months ago I would have said it was too soon. But here's the thing I've learned about myself. I know the difference now between being with someone because I'm scared of being alone and being with someone because they make my life better." She moved closer to him on the couch. "You make my life better, Jake. Not because you take care of me or because you solve my problems, but because you see me. The real me. You listen to my thoughts and respect my opinions. You encourage me to pursue the things that make me happy." Jake reached out and took her hand. "You make my life better too. These past few months, getting to know you, watching you, rediscover yourself, it's been amazing. So what do we do about it?" Jake smiled. "We take it slow. We keep talking to each other the way we have been. We make sure we're doing this for the right reasons." "And what are the right reasons?" "Because we genuinely care about each other. Because we want to build something together, not because we need each other to feel complete." Riley squeezed his hand. "I like that. Building something together." Their first kiss happened naturally, a few minutes later, soft and gentle and full of promise. It felt nothing like the desperate, scared person who had walked into his room 6 months earlier. This was Riley as she truly was, confident and happy and choosing to be there. Over the following months, their relationship grew slowly and steadily. Riley kept her own apartment, but spent more and more time at Jake's place. They would work on their respective projects during the day, then come together in the evenings to share their thoughts and experiences. Riley's art continued to flourish. She had several pieces displayed in a local coffee shop, and had even sold a few to customers who fell in love with her work. Jake's business was growing too, partly because Riley had started helping him with client communications and project organization. "We make a good team," Jake said one evening as they reviewed his latest client proposals. "We do," Riley agreed. "But you know what I like most about us?" "What?" "We're both whole people who choose to be together. We're not two broken halves trying to make one complete person. We're two complete people who make each other better." Jake looked at this incredible woman who had literally walked into his life and changed everything. The scared, lost person from that Tuesday night was gone, replaced by someone confident and creative and full of life. "That night when you came to my apartment," Jake said, "I thought I was helping you, but I think you helped me just as much." "Armon, so?" "You reminded me what it feels like to really connect with someone, to have conversations that matter, to care about someone else's dreams and goals." Jake smiled. "You walked into my room and changed my whole world." Riley laughed. The same beautiful, genuine smile that had broken his heart that first night. "I guess sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to ask for help." Looking back, they both knew that night had been a turning point for both of them. It was the night Riley found the courage to reclaim her life, And the night? Jake learned that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unexpected moments.